and then Jason is going to join in for the second section. So ultimately, I suppose we looked at this presentation and thought, what is the low hanging fruit, and what can we alter and adapt as players, and I suppose as people first before even being players, that we can alter and adapt to improve our physical health first of all, and subsequently our performance. So some actionable changes that I suppose are easy to understand first of all, and that they're easy to implement, but also that they're grounded in science. So those three that we feel everyone can improve, both as people first and athletes second, are nutrition, sleep, and recovery. So I suppose in the course of putting this presentation together, Jason and I have had a few chats on what we'd like to address, and I think with the diverse, I suppose, range of people that we have on the call, from players to coaches to parents, it's important to address, I suppose, what the low-hanging fruit isn't, as well as what it is. So I suppose, especially in these times that we are, where we're all stuck on our phones and stuck in social media, it can be very easy to blur that line between what's actually useful and what isn't. So I think it's very important to be aware of these three areas that aren't necessarily going to improve your general health or your athletic performance. So I suppose first of all, with the advent of social media, it's not too long since I was a teenager, but I certainly didn't have as much stuff being thrown in my face on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, whatever that may be, in terms of people promoting products that ultimately they're just doing to get more money, rather than looking out for the people that they're promoting them to. So I suppose it's important that we do have an impressionable audience on that. We are aware of these influencer gimmicks and influencer marketing, ultimately, that these people generally don't care about the people they're preaching to, and they just care about getting the money and heading off to Dubai for themselves. Second of all, the gimmick products. I think one of these kind of comes around yearly. When I was growing up, it was probably an abs trainer, because lads wanted to look like Ronaldo. Whereas now it's massage guns, different weight trainers, vibrating foam rollers, all that sort of stuff. I've seen people, a couple of my mates, have fallen into the trap of spending hundreds of euro on these sort of items, but they won't spend 150 on an Avamore protein milk carton in the shop. So it's important to be aware of these kind of things as well. And finally, the quick fix supplements. So I suppose the old adage goes, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. So these aloe vera gels, detox diets, fat burners, skinny teas, coffees, Herbalife, all that sort of stuff. That's a gimmick, ultimately, to get you to part with your hard-earned money. So I suppose if a goal of yours is to improve your body composition, be that gaining muscle mass or losing weight, the body is a clever old system, and there's one way of doing that, and that's by eating less calories than you need. These sort of weight loss pills or diets or whatever, they don't work. They're not sustainable long term, and they cause, I suppose, yo-yo dieting, where you might spend a few weeks on this meal replacement shake that for your breakfast that might be 200 calories, when your breakfast prior to that might have been 500. So naturally, as a human, when you get sick of this shake after 4 weeks, and you go back to your normal breakfast, suddenly you're eating 300 calories extra. So naturally, you're going to bounce up the weight again. So it's very important to just be aware of these traps as well. So I suppose the learning outcomes are in relation to what we think are the low-hanging fruits, ultimately, and that's recovery, nutrition, and wellness. So the first part of the presentation is primarily going to be focused on nutrition, and then we'll encompass some stuff on recovery and wellness as we go throughout as well. Okay, so I suppose it's important to understand what the training cycle for fitness looks like before going on to speak about nutrition or sleep or recovery or whatever that may be. So there is a cycle on how we train and how we recover and adapt. So Jason will go into that in terms of the breakdown and build up later on. But I suppose briefly, as you can see from this graphic here with the 4 areas, when you start training, you're at an initial baseline. So you're always going to be at an initial baseline of fitness. You'll then train. So while you train, your level of fitness actually decreases. So that's when fatigue kicks in and accumulates. You damage your muscle fibers, and that's where you get a little bit of soreness or fatigue or cramps or whatever that may be. So after your training or your game, your body enters a recovery period, and provided your nutritional and recovery strategies are on point, you'll return to a higher level than your initial baseline, and that's known as a supercompensation effect. So ultimately, this is when you go back training, and your body's at a slightly higher level than when you started. So your body has initiated an adaptation to the training stimulus, be that on pitch or in gym, and it's able to perform more efficiently and more effectively next time out, by whatever you're putting through from an exercise perspective. So the first section of our presentation tonight is going to be looking at nutrition and primarily sports nutrition. And I suppose it's important to acknowledge that Jason and I we're educated. I have a degree in sport and exercise science, Jason in strength and conditioning. So while we aren't qualified nutritionists, we have been educated to advise on sports nutrition through our degree. So we have a good understanding of what nutrition should look like for athletes. And I suppose with that in mind, when you mention sports nutrition, that their perception is that it's all about supplements or different stuff like beetroot shots or that sort of thing. But in reality, it's a lot more simple than that. It's real food, and it's a food first approach. And you'll notice that we haven't mentioned anything on supplements throughout the slide, because we'd rather that people get their fuel from food first and look to supplements second. So it's important at this point to look at the nutritional demands of our Gaelic games, because ultimately that's what we're training for if we're players. And I suppose our Gaelic games, be it at hurling, football, ladies football or camogie, they're high paced, they're intermittent sports, so they have varying bouts of high intensity activity that can be 70 to 120 different bursts of activity in a game, averaging 5 to 7 seconds in duration. And more often than not, you have incomplete recovery. So you might get 10 seconds off, you might get 10 minutes off, depending on how lazy or how active you are. So your body doesn't get a chance to fully recover during the game. Along with that, we have frequent training in games. There's also, I suppose, a high energy expenditure associated with these training in games. Again, this can range from 800 to 1500 calories, depending on your age or your gender. And again, I suppose depending on your position too, if you're a hard working midfielder or the lazy corner forward, as they say. So I suppose the demands of this schedule, we can be training 2, 3, 4 nights a week. We might have a game or two in a week as well, fitting in a gym session or two as well. It's important that we are cognizant that there is a high energy intake, and it's important to, I suppose, achieve this to sustain and improve our performance ultimately. So the goals of nutrition for sport, they're fivefold. So firstly, it's to enhance performance. Secondly, it's to prevent illness. Thirdly, to facilitate recovery, facilitate training adaptation, and to optimize body composition as well. So I suppose there are a number of causes of fatigue in our games. Two main areas here are dehydration and depletion of our carb stores. So I'll touch on this later on, but it's important that I suppose I do acknowledge there are a certain number of myths around carbs. They've got this stigma of them being evil. If you ever talk to someone that says they're trying to lose a bit of timber, the first thing they're always going to cut out is carbs for some reason. So look, that's not good. It's maladaptive. Your body needs carbs. Carbs are your fuel source. So I suppose it is important to acknowledge that. Dehydration as well. It's an area Jason and I feel that everyone can improve on. And it's a big contributing factor to fatigue in our Gaelic games. Both of these areas, or I suppose our depletion of our carb stores and dehydration, they can have adverse effects on mental and physical performance. And I suppose just to touch on that last point, I suppose the current guidelines regarding the situation we're in, and I suppose the announcement last night, they're not easy, but it is important that we promote best practice in terms of achieving your weekly target of 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity a week. So however you achieve that, if it's going on runs, if it's walking, if it's kicking a few scores, whatever that may be, just to try and stay fit and healthy, get as much exercise as you can, eat as healthily as you can, and try and limit your screen time, if at all possible too. Right, so I suppose now we're going to delve into the different fuel sources for our body. So our body is an engine, and it requires the right fuel. So I suppose you wouldn't put dirty diesel in your car. So your body, it's your greatest asset, so it should be the same. If we look at the diesel gauges on the right of the picture there, prior to a game or training, we'd ideally like to be the top right there, where we have a full tank. However, a lot of the time we're in the middle, where we've half a tank of fuel. So I suppose if you take away anything from tonight, it's how to make sure you're always in the top right, and that'll help you to perform better. So with that in mind, the three main fuel sources for our body are our carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Okay, so provided we get those three vital nutrients in sufficient amounts, we'll achieve good health first, and good performance second. Okay, so the three fuel sources for us, they're known as macronutrients, and those are carbohydrates, protein, and fat. So the next few slides, I'll go more in depth on what each of those three things are, and what sort of foods you'll find them in, and why they're important to have in your diet. So first of all, carbohydrates. As I mentioned earlier, it's your body's main fuel source. It's not evil. Again, it's very important that if we are trying to improve our body composition, that we're cognizant that that's achieved by a calorie deficit. So again, eating less calories than you need to in a day. So if my maintenance calories, so that's the amount of calories I need to survive, are 2,000, maybe I have to eat 1,900 to drop a little bit of fat. So I'm not going to ultimately improve my body composition by just stripping my diet of carbohydrates, and I'm certainly not going to improve my performance by doing that. So it's very important that we're aware of that, and that I suppose improving body composition is through a healthy calorie deficit and not a fad diet. So carbohydrates, they are our main energy source. It's our body's preferred source. However, it is limited. It depletes very quickly, particularly in games and training. So it's vital that as GA players, we ensure these carbohydrate stores are topped up prior to competition. Competition can be trained in our match, and that they're replenished very quickly after. So the guidelines for athletic populations are that you have 6 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of your body mass. So whatever your body mass is in kilograms, you multiply that by 6 to 10, and you'll get your recommended intake for carbohydrates there. Okay, so I suppose we have a number of sources that we can get these carbs from. There are good and bad ones per se, and it's important to know the difference. So I suppose carbs can be painted as evil because of the ones in the bottom row there under the red heading. So usually these carbs are very high in calories, they're very calorie dense without being very filling, and they're not very satiating, so they're not going to keep you full, and they're going to trigger your brain's pleasure hormones. That's the sugar rush. They're going to want to eat more of them. However, it's a quick fix ultimately. They're high in calories, and they're not conducive to fueling yourself for health or for performance. So preferably we'd like you to get your carbohydrates from the top there. So your porridge, your fresh fruit, sweet potatoes, multi-seed bread over the white bread, so that can be wholemeal as well, and brown or wild rice. So those are some examples of good sources, and if your diet is littered with these, ultimately you're going along the right tracks. Okay, next we have our protein. So I suppose if the carbohydrates, come back to the car analogy, were our fuel, without knowing a whole pile about cars other than that I know how to drive it, our protein could be looked at as like our oil. Okay, so ultimately protein is vital for growth and recovery. So as I mentioned in the second or third slide, when we train, we're breaking down our muscle fibers. So it's important to build them back up and to get stronger and to recover. We have enough protein. So protein, it's the building blocks of our muscle, and it helps repair our muscle fibers after training. As I said, vital for recovery. Again, for athletic populations, 1 to 6 or 1.6 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram body mass. That's, I suppose, very sciencey. And in a few slides' time, I'll have a more digestible, I suppose, if you excuse the pun, method of how to calculate your portion sizes for the different macronutrients. Important to note here as well that protein should be eaten throughout the day. So you need to eat smaller meals often, ultimately, and you need a constant hit of protein throughout the day. So 20 grams of protein per meal or snack. I suppose a typical Irish or GA thing is to have a big, massive dinner in the evening with a load of protein and have very little throughout the day. However, your body can only use so much. So it's important that you give it constant little hits rather than one big, massive hit in the evening. So there are a number of sources that we can get this protein from. So it's not just meat. It's in a variety of different foods. It is an animal products, such as our meat, but it's also in plants and nuts as well. So I suppose these nuts, such as almonds, all this sort of stuff, they're very handy for you to be snacking on in the car throughout the day, along with, I suppose, from the right Greek yogurt, that sort of stuff. If you match a bit of yogurt with some nuts, there's an example of a very high protein snack that's good for you throughout the day. So it is important to realise that it is in more sources than just your animal meat products. So that's important to note too. Finally, then we have our fat. So again, fat is vital. I think another common misconception is that we might put on a little bit of weight or get fat from eating fat. However, we get fat from eating calories, so not necessarily too much fat. So it's very important to acknowledge that too. Fat is vital for our immune system and for vitamin absorption. It provides the energy necessary for daily functioning. It supports our cell growth, protects our organs, helps maintain our body temperature. It helps our body absorb nutrients we get from our food. It also releases important hormones to our body. However, I suppose it is important to acknowledge when it is eaten in excess, it can lead to weight gain, and when it's eaten from I suppose, the wrong sources, if you will. However, it is important that fat is a very important component of an athlete's diet. So it's needed for performance, and it's vital for a healthy athlete and a healthy human. It's another energy source. So while our carbohydrate is our more, I suppose, efficient and quicker source of energy, fat is important too. So if you're very, very lean and you have a low percentage body fat, which I have seen in my few years' experience with intercounty teams, if a fella is, I suppose, anything over 12 or 13% body fat, he's very down on himself. However, it's important to realise that we do need a little bit of fat, because when those carb stores run out, and they will, 40 minutes into a game, you need that little bit of fat there to get you over the line for the next 20, 30 minutes. So I suppose the fitter you become as well, the better our muscles become at using fat to fuel exercise. So at that lower intensity exercise, our body likes to use fat. So I suppose if you're fitter and you're further from max exertion when you are exercising, you can save some of these carbs and use fat to fuel yourself. So in theory, then you're prolonging your time to fatigue or to exhaustion. So it is very important in our diet as athletes and as people. So I suppose there are a number of sources, and like our carbohydrates, there's good ones and there's bad ones. So the examples of the good ones are here on our left, under the sort of turquoise colour there. So these are typically, they're liquid at room temperature, and they're usually oily, and they're found in plant products. So they're good for us because they contain higher levels of high density lipoproteins. So that's our good cholesterol, and you might hear that on TV. And they're mainly found in again, nuts and avocados and that sort of stuff, leafy vegetables, some fish as well. Whereas on the right, the more evil version is your saturated fat. It's usually solid, very easy to freeze, and I suppose it's the example of that bad cholesterol, and it's important that we don't have too much of this in our diet, and that's typically found in your red meat or your butter sort of products. So it's important to be cognizant of that too, that we don't have too much of that in our diet. Okay, so on that, I suppose Jason and I agree on this. There's a few mistakes that we make as GA players, and Jason and I are just as guilty as this as any of you are. So firstly, it's that we eat too many of the processed carbs. So your sweets or your sugary stuff, or your white bread over the brown bread, and insufficient complex carbs. So that's our sweet potatoes, porridge, all that sort of stuff. Typically, we see a low intake of protein and low intake of healthy fats, and as you've seen, those are very important components of our diet. And typically, we see a poor understanding of fueling and refueling for performance. So with that now, we're going to hand it over to you. So if you have a game at 6 in the evening, when times go back to normal, hopefully in the not too distant future, if you'd like to write into the chat box what you think would be good to eat before that game at 6 in the evening, whenever that time may be, that's up to yourself, and what you think would be something good to eat after that game. So we'll give you 30 seconds to a minute if you want to start typing that into the box, and we'll see what you come back with. To start us off, I'll show in something.
Jason, can you see the comments coming through?
No, Mike. If there's no comments, guys, we can drive on. Don't worry about it.
I'm pretty sure there is, but I think it's the system.
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's the system. Could I get a few raised hands, please, folks, with a few comments, because the system is not playing its part for us here. I'm pretty sure that there is people posting comments, but we're not seeing them for some reason. NOD. And thank you very much. If you'd like to open your microphone, please, then.
I'd say what we could do is we could drive on, and we can come back to the comments when they do come in.
Yeah. Yeah, just hold on a second, Jason. Okay, actually, I can't see a comment here. Okay, sorry, there is comments coming through, so maybe we're just wait. Okay, so Connor, I have for you chicken and sweet potato at 3 p.m. I also have chicken and rice.
Super. Both very good before and after a game. I'll push away on it. If there's any more, you could give me a shout.
Let's take one more there. So an omelette, banana, and sweet potato.
Super. Yeah. all very good examples. Especially the banana and the omelette, that might be that bit lighter on our stomach before a game, so it might be a little bit easier for us to digest. So that's perfect. Good stuff, lads. And we'll drive away on. Okay, so I mentioned this previously. Again, this is a very handy graphic for giving us an illustration of what amounts we should be eating. So if we look at our protein, a portion of protein, so what we're looking at for each meal and snack is roughly the size of your palm. Our vegetables then is a portion size is the size of your fist. For your carbs, it's a portion is the size of your cup hands, and then lastly a portion of fat is your thumb. So it's very important that we're getting adequate portions of all these four areas. And I suppose with the vegetables, it's important, and fruit, it's important to eat the colour of the rainbow. So if you're eating all the colours of the rainbow with your fruit and veg, you're not too far wrong either. Okay, so we'll move on now and look at hydration. So I suppose needless enough to say, another very important aspect of our health as humans, firstly, and as athletes, second, is hydration. So from an exercise perspective, as we exercise, our core body temperature increases, and water helps to regulate this body temperature and cool us down. I suppose this water is very important as well to transport nutrients to our body. So if we lack that during exercise or during general day-to-day tasks, we'll get some symptoms such as, I suppose, being dizzy, cramps, tiredness, irritability. They're all telltale signs that you're probably not drinking enough, and you might be close to being dehydrated. So I suppose something that's very eye-opening is that being dehydrated by just 2% can impair your physical performance by 10%. So if we're looking at the low-hanging fruit, as we mentioned earlier, something we can all improve on, and I've been doing it throughout this webinar, is a little subtle messages to be drinking our water. So if we're drinking our water every day throughout the day, keeping our hydration levels high, that's a low-hanging fruit straight away ticked off, and it's something that's easy to do, something that's simple, and something that will have a good impact on your performance. So I suppose when we do train, and this is any sort of training, but I suppose in particular our field training or our aerobic sessions, if we go running, if you weigh yourself before your session and after your session, and for every kilogram of body weight you have lost, you need to replace that with 1 to 1.5 liters of fluid. Okay, so it's very important that you replenish any water loss after your session, as that will help speed up that recovery process again and get you out of being the dehydrated area you can be in. I suppose on the flip side, there's a tendency to possibly hit the panic buttons maybe 2 hours before a game and start lumping a 2-litre bottle of water into us. At that stage, it's probably a little bit too late. We need to be drinking our water consistently throughout the day before a game, and in those, I suppose, short periods before the game, 30 minutes to an hour, just drink the thirst. If you're drinking excess amount of water, it's just going to flow through you, and if anything, it could possibly dehydrate you quicker. So very important that it's a consistent thing, regardless of game day or not, and in particular leading up to game day, that we're drinking sufficient water in the 3, 4, 5 days leading up to it. So a quick little self-assessment to see if we are dehydrated. If you think of WUT, the W standing for weight, so in line with what I said there in the scales, is your weight noticeably lower? Is your urine dark yellow, going on the scale we have on the right? And are you thirsty? So I suppose if you're taking any of these boxes, it should be a little red flag to say you might in fact be bordering dehydration. So important to get the water into you at that stage. So there are 3 key periods for hydration with regard to sport, and that's pre-exercise, during exercise, and post-exercise. So before I touch on those periods, a handy little trick I found is in the green box here. So this will give you your required intake per day. So if you multiply your weight in kilograms by 39, that will give you in litres, in milliliters, how much water you should be drinking in a day, and that's every day. Okay, so and on days you're training, it'll probably be a little bit higher again for reasons I've mentioned. But quick example: if you're 82 kilos, multiply that by 39, and you have to drink just over 3 liters a day. So that's something that we can all do, and all multiply out, and we'll see if we're getting close to that, and if we are, great. If we're not, it's an area we can improve on. So the key periods now, pre-exercise. So as I said, it's important to be drinking consistently throughout the day, before we exercise or before our game or wherever that may be, and in the short period before the game that you're drinking to thirst. Okay, if you're trying to get it all in, look, it's gone beyond the point at that stage. So it's very important that we're drinking enough every other day as well, not just game day, because as I mentioned, it can be hitting the panic buttons and trying to get it all in and nearly cramming the day of a test sort of thing. So it's very important that it's a consistent practice throughout the week, exercise or no exercise. So during exercise then, so as we exercise and due to this exercise, our body temperature increases, our sweat rate increases as well to try and keep our body temperature low. So when we sweat, we lose electrolytes in that sweat. So that's a buzzword, I suppose, Lucozade Sport have come up with. But essentially, it's a buzzword for minerals such as sodium or salt. So salt, or in turn, I suppose, in more scientific terms, sodium. It's very important. It's a very important mineral for us. It helps maintain our fluid balance, so that can help prevent dehydration. It also helps us with our cognitive function and muscular contractions as well. So I suppose ensuring that we replace the sodium lost in our sweat, that's vital. As if we don't, we're going to fatigue a little bit earlier, and you're going to cramp up. So there are simple homemade drinks that you can do for this. So fill up a bottle of water, a little bit of my body, a little bit of salt, give it a shake. There's your electrolyte drink straight away. As well, I suppose during exercise, those carbohydrate sources do go very quickly. So that's where the Lucozade Sport can come in handy, because not only is it going to replenish your fluid stores, there's also carbohydrate present in it. So you're killing two birds with the one stone. So little amounts of that during the game, every 10 to 15 minutes, can be handy as well. And in the post-exercise period, weighing yourself and comparing the weight change to what you were pre-exercise, and then acted upon that to make sure that you're rehydrating yourself. So a couple of tips for hydration that we've come up with. First of all, I suppose it can be a little bit daunting to drink a big 2 litre bottle. So if you drink 4 smaller bottles, you'll have that little bit of sense of accomplishment, and it can be a lot easier to get through rather than one big bottle. So that might be something you can do. Secondly, then, is to start early. So if you have a glass of water beside your bed and you nick that when you wake up in the morning, brilliant. And if you also try and get a litre in before 11 o'clock. So rather than trying to drink it all in the evening, if you're drinking it throughout the day, that's going to be easier for you. For those of you who don't like to taste the water or find it a little bit bland, you can add a little dash of my body. Getting a reusable bottle is handy as well. There's also lots of apps on your phone that you can use to track your intake, and that can be handy as well to keep you on track. And finally, you could set reminders on your phone, so maybe for 11, 1, 3 o'clock, whatever that may be. Just handy little tricks to try and get that water intake up. So at this point in the presentation, I'm going to hand you over to Jason, and he's going to take you through the next portion of our presentation.
Yeah, cheers, Connor. Thanks. I'm just going to take control there, Connor. You might let me in.
Is that okay now?
Perfect. Yeah, that should be up on screen for everyone. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, thanks guys, and again, thanks for joining us. That was very comprehensive from Connor, so I have a lot to follow up on. But I suppose basically the first thing I'd like to say is we're going to be speaking predominantly about both the athlete and the coach here going forward from a recovery aspect, particularly with our sleep, and then from a wellness aspect in terms of our monitoring and certain things that we can track as coaches, as parents, and as players, to kind of get an idea of where we're at in terms of our wellness. So when we think about recovery, again, like Connor has mentioned on a couple of occasions, we're thinking about the low-hanging fruit, but we're also thinking of the big rocks. And for me, what those big rocks are is, like Connor said, the nutrition, the hydration, and the sleep. And I suppose when we talk about sleep and we talk about recovery, the following things can be considered. Adequate recovery enables the body to prepare for the next session. So, simply put, if we're not recovered, we're not going to have a good output in our training session or in our match. And that's, as athletes particularly, that's not what we want. And as coaches, that's not what we want to see. And again, as parents, that's probably not what we're looking for. So how can we make positive changes, or how can we become aware of that area? Well, I suppose a couple of the key things to be conscious of is this buzzword at the moment of burnout or overtraining. And what that actually is and what that looks like is overtraining can be classified as prolonged training with insufficient recovery and high levels of stress on the body. And what we mean by high levels of stress is just high levels of training load. So if you take the example of a really competent player who is 14 or 15 years of age, they're probably masters to 9, 10, potentially 12, 13 teams at any one time. So it's just being cognizant of what aspects we can help that athlete with, if they're our athlete, or what aspects we can help ourselves with if we're that player. Because overtraining leads to chronic fatigue. It does decrease your performance. You have motivational issues, and also you've potential muscle soreness and repeated bouts of muscle soreness, which will affect your performance. So I suppose this arrow approach is probably a good summarization of why it's so important to look after ourselves in terms of recovery from both an athlete and a coach perspective. And this is kind of the cycle of training here. So again, if we're cognizant of what Connor has spoke about in detail in terms of our nutrition, and we keep that in the back of our mind here, and we just look at this green and red arrow, and in its most simplistic terms, let's call this the training cycle. So at the left-hand side here, where my mouse is at the green arrow, there's your training. Okay. After your training, you're going into your red zone because you're tired. And that's, again, speaking in most simplistic terms. So effectively what's happening is when we're training, we're breaking down our muscles. We're actually micro tearing our muscles. And if we don't give adequate time to recover, and we don't give adequate fuel to our body and sleep and hydration, we're potentially going to be training the next time we go, and it's not going to be a green arrow, it's going to be a red arrow. And that effect is going to be a constant cycle, which then leads back to this arrow approach of overtraining. So how can we prepare ourselves, and how can we help ourselves? Well, again, we're speaking about the nutritional strategies Connor has spoke about. So getting adequate fist sizes of protein, carbohydrates, and fats within our body, making sure that we have adequate rest and recovery. And again, I'm going to go through certain things that we can do to help and promote recovery, and having an appropriate diet. And catabolism then is just essentially the breakdown of all of those nutritional aspects that you put into your body, and returning them back in as an energy source. So again, just a simplistic view of the training cycle. So why is sleep so important? Well, again, and it's I suppose it's something we've mentioned a lot, myself and Connor, when we were putting this together, is everything when it comes to training, and everything when it comes to sports science, and even technical, tactical, psychological, it's all individual specific. So what works for me might not work for Connor, but it might work for 5 or 6 people on the line. And we see a lot of research telling us, that adequate sleep is 7 to 9 hours. And again, that is done off of a lot of research studies. But there is some people out there who can function off 4, 5, 6, 7, be it 10 hours sleep. It varies, but it's just important to note best practice here. So best practice does tell us that athletes do require, and even ourselves would say, we require 7 to 9 hours sleep, just to have that recovery aspect. And with all the fancy systems out there now in terms of Fitbit and smartwatches and Apple Watches, we've actually a far greater understanding, I would say, of the patterns of sleep, whether it's a deep sleep we have or a light sleep, and what that actually means in terms of our recovery. So again, we are getting there with those certain ideologies. And sleep has been identified as a really contributing factor to positive output performance. So again, I suppose it's the obvious. If we don't have a good night's sleep, the chances of us performing well in our training or our matches, it's going to decrease. And then finally, adolescents and adults who have high training load may require higher sleep. And I suppose one thing we've come across there in the research is the potential benefits of a nap. And I am very cognizant that it's particularly hard in the GA world, because most of our athletes, all of our athletes, work during the day and you know, train at night. So getting that little midday snap or sleep or snooze in is difficult. But what we are doing here is we're just giving you the research behind it and presenting to you that it has been found beneficial that if we shut down for 20-30 minutes in the afternoon, it actually accentuates recovery within the training cycle. And I suppose sleep hygiene, sleep tips is what we would go here is, firstly, have a regular sleep routine. So it's no good for recovery if, for example, tonight I go to sleep at 8 o'clock, tomorrow night it's 12 o'clock, and the following evening it's 10 o'clock, because my body is continuously having to adapt to that training cycle. And 9 times out of 10, I'm waking up at the same time. So I'm either getting more sleep or less sleep. So my body is confused if that is the case. So having a regular sleep routine is hugely important. And again, a lot of research has come out in terms of ensuring the bedroom is quiet and comfortable. And we have, like we said, dark out curtains, particularly in the summer when it doesn't get dark until sometimes 9, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. So it's important to have those dark out curtains so we can actually shut down. The big factor within sleep, I suppose, is us all, and we all do. We have our phones in our hands while we're shutting down and going to sleep. And I suppose one thing we would say to you is, if that is the case, make sure that you turn the screen light down to its last, because your eyes are constantly attracted to that screen light, and your eyes and your body actually feel like it's the middle of the day when there's that much brightness going into your eyes, and it makes it harder for you to shut down and switch off. And a simple thing like putting the phone into a place, like I was joking with Mike and Connor yesterday, there's times there when I know I have to get up really early in the morning to drive up to Laois to do a S&C session with the school, for example. So I could be leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I know I need to get to bed early. So what I'll do is I'll place my phone over on the windowsill, because it's cold when I get out of the bed and I don't want to get out of the bed to go get that phone. So it forces me to stay off my phone. So I suppose it's having little coping mechanisms like that to keep you off your phone. Reading is hugely beneficial to promote sleep. So get a good book, and let's just chew the fat on the book and get stuck into that book. And within no time, you'll probably feel that your eyes are getting a little bit sleepy. And again, just avoiding caffeine late at night and in the evening. So coffee seems to be the buzz thing at the moment. There's shops popping up everywhere delivering coffee, and it seems to be the fashionable thing to do is drink coffee. And again, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but what I'm saying is potentially just try and avoid it maybe after 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, because what you don't want is exacerbating your sleep and getting less recovery because you've caffeine constantly keeping you awake. And the other thing I would say, particularly for the bulk of the players, I know there's a huge amount of players actually on this call, is the challenge you'll face here is particularly you're going to be training late at night. So you could be training until 9, half 9. The key thing there for you is that you get a substantial meal into you as soon as possible after training. Because we probably all realize that once we eat, it takes us a little bit of time to digest food, but then all of a sudden we get a little bit tired, no matter what time of the day it is. So getting that substantial meal into you as soon as possible after your training will allow your body to shut down that little bit quicker, because the adrenaline does be running high after training. And if we don't have that meal and then we get hungry maybe an hour or two later after we get home, well, all of a sudden we're just pushing our sleep routine further and further down the tracks. So that's probably one of the other tips we would promote. And again, we were speaking about, I think this is a good visual, because if you take into consideration the what Connor was talking about, the low-hanging fruit, we've got our nutrition, our hydration, and what I've just spoke about, our sleep. If we can get all those things to a really good level, we're going to be up here around green and blue, and we're going to have a fully charged battery, okay? And let's say we're at green. Those couple of little modalities that we spoke about, they're the 0.1 percenters, okay? So what I would say to you on that is potentially they will bring us to the blue, but only if we're in a good pattern. Whereas if we don't get good nutrition, hydration, or sleep pattern into our body, the chances are we're going to be functioning down in this area here. And we're going to be in the red zone, and we're going to be in the orange zone. And again, like I've spoken about the cycle of training, we are potentially going to be in a scenario where we're overtraining and we're going to get a little bit fucked up. Seconds there now. Okay, I'm just moving on. Okay, so our recovery. So what's most important? So the most important thing is that we cool down. It's probably something myself and Connor have spoke about, and we don't see it a lot in teams potentially that lose in matches, or teams potentially that are training. That the cool down is common practice. Getting some stretching routines in and making it a common practice within your training. We all warm up, and the cool down is just as important. A rehydration and a recovery drink straight after training. So, for example, very simple, some water and a banana, or some chocolate milk and a banana. Get that into you the minute you get into your dressing room. If it's in your gear bag, or if it's not in your gear bag, bring it with you and have it in the gear bag ready to go. That's for you as the player. And I suppose for you as the coach then, because again, we do have a huge amount of coaches in the room. A simple thing like once every, let's say you have 15 or 20 players. So let's ask the parents once every 20 weeks, can we chop up some oranges and put them into a bowl so the players can eat when they get straight in from training, and they're getting that little bit of sugar and they're getting that little bit of carbohydrate from that. And again, it's not too much to ask for once every 20 weeks to chop up 4 or 5 oranges so the players can have them when they come in. So again, it's just kind of thinking outside the box in terms of what can I as the player do and what can I as the coach do to really hit these big rocks within our recovery of the players. Because if we're cognizant that we have players who are hugely busy with school, club, and potentially county academy squads and county squads, these are the things that are really going to help your players improve performance for your team. And again, I suppose the cold water immersion has been around now for a while, and effectively what we're talking about there is cold baths or ice baths. And again, I suppose it's important at this point, as much as some might want to throw young people into the ice baths after training, it is important to note we're talking probably from adults onwards here with our cold water immersion. There is, slides are gone there now. I'll just wait for them to come back up. Just bear with me, folks.
Probably a click of a button somewhere there, Jason. Connor, are you okay to just put the slides back up
Yeah,
again?
I'll get it back up now. It'll come up in just a sec.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I suppose while we're waiting for the slides to come up, I can talk away anyway. So with around the cold water immersions, there is a couple of things we need to be cognizant of. So if we are doing those with our players and we are using that within our clubs, I can drive on here now, Connor. It's just important that we're cognizant that, certain players potentially might have skin allergies, or certain players might have asthma, or certain players might have certain underlying issues with blood pressure or heart rate that we need to be aware of. And I suppose that really comes down to us getting to know our players and us getting to know, what the players are comfortable with. But what we're saying here is they are that are used, and they are something that potentiate recovery within our athletes. Then moving on, I suppose, and again, as I move down through this list, these are certain little things that we can take away with us, maybe potentially from tonight, and try them. What I'd say to you is try 1 or 2 of these things when we do get back to normal. And if they work and there's a positive output, even if it's only a placebo effect, so be it. If it works for you and it works for your players, potentially we're on the right tracks. So a hot shower and a cold shower, intermittent, has been shown to accentuate recovery as well, and also wearing compression garments. So I suppose to give you a simplified version of the science behind it, if we wear a body warmer or we wear compression garments in our legs, what we're doing is we're actually tightening up the muscles within our legs, okay, and we're keeping the muscles warm. That's accentuating and that's promoting blood flow through the body a little bit quicker than it would if they weren't compressed. When we do take the compression off, then after 2 or 3 hours or in the morning time, the blood comes from our heart straight into those muscles and just promotes that recovery again. So again, those are little types of areas that we could look at to get that marginal gain. And again, this is probably the biggest one on the PowerPoint slide here, our post-match meal. And if we refer back to that slide, again, these slides will be sent out to you. But if you refer back to that really good slide Connor had up in terms of the fist-sized portions, and we're talking about a 4-to-1 carb to protein. So when we go back to that slide and we look at what we were saying about the fist size for the carbs, it's 4 doses to 1 of the proteins. And then I suppose the most important thing is actually rest and relax. For you as the coach, like sometimes delivering a session is very, very stressful. It takes a lot of energy out of you. You could be absolutely zapped. And also you as the player, it's training is tough. You're effectively like hurting your body when you train. So it is important that we just have that switch off time and that relaxation time, just away from any type of training or any type of the sport we're playing. And then effectively, our sleep is our biggest rock on this page. So our sleep and our post-match meals. Okay, so that's just on recovery. And I suppose, again, I spoke about the three big rocks for me. And effectively, we're talking about the NHS, the nutrition, the hydration, and the sleep. We're now going to move into the wellness. And again, I'm going to be speaking in terms of an athlete and a coach. And really what I'm going to be looking at here, I suppose, is the training load, the balance between training and relaxation, and the balance between training and playing matches, life skills, and self-help systems in terms of tracking your training load as a player and also tracking your team's training load as a coach, and why that potentially might be important. So if we look at the overtraining, the signs and the recommendations for it. So again, as defined, overtraining is an accumulation of training, non-training stress, resulting in long-term decrement in performance capacity, which may take weeks or months to restore. So again, overtraining is going to take potentially days to weeks, whereas burnout is going to take weeks to months to potentially years, So it's important to note, and it's important to get to know your players and get to know how busy they are and what's making them tick. So again, the signs of these, the things to watch out for is chronic fatigue, so bags under the players' eyes, lateness to training. Maybe the players are answering back to you sometimes, or they're being a little bit cheeky. They potentially are simple things like they could be kicking the ball away when you finish a drill deliberately. So sometimes we can put that down to behavioral changes, but also we have to be cognizant that it could actually just be a sign or a symptom of they're getting to that stage now where they're getting really, really fatigued, they're getting really, really tired, and chronic muscle soreness. So again, the recommendations for this would be I suppose, and it's a hotly debated issue within soccer, rugby, and GA, is the crossover of what's going on in terms of all the players playing the one sport. But I suppose the big thing I would take away from this, the big thing I would recommend is we're in a position, if we know all these things are happening and we know we've got a player A who is very, very busy and is playing in all these sports, sometimes I think the best thing for us is to be the bigger person, as hard as it can be, and to respect that child is busy, and sometimes to actually say, no, you stay at home and you rest, because I guarantee you will get in turn absolute dedication from that athlete, and you will get an output from that athlete in the long term. Whereas if you keep pushing, potentially that athlete, by the time they get to 13 or 17 or 18, they're nearly fatigued of the sport. So sometimes it's probably from our perspective, when we have this knowledge and we are cognizant and we do know our athletes, sometimes that is something that potentially I would be pushing towards. And then just achieving the big rocks, so the nutrition, the hydration, and the sleep. And if you know, for example, as a coach on the call, that your athletes don't have good nutritional habits or hydration habits or sleep, what can you do? So can you have water bottles at stations in your training sessions? Simple things. Can you have that post-match bananas or post-match oranges sponsored by a parent once every 10 or 15 weeks, or sponsored by the club, or do a little fundraiser to have this little kitty to get the fruit and the recovery drinks? And then can we make sure that if a player is recovering, that even though we might want that player back in straight away, and even for you as the player, you might want to come back in because you're after missing out on an important game and you're missing the sport. Sometimes it's important just to ease yourself back in. So do a training without going into contact, for example. So if you're coming back from an ankle or a little hamstring niggle or a quad niggle, sometimes it's important to train on your own for maybe 20 or 25 minutes of a session, do some stretching. The next session, come back in, join in some non-contact drills. The next session, come back in and join in maybe on 75% of the training session. And you're slowly building your return to play then, and you're slowly building up your tolerance to the training. And that's probably going to negate against you getting a re-injury and missing even more. So it's probably just being cognizant of that as a coach and an athlete. And again, I suppose just even going through the burnout and the overtrained again. So what are the signs? What are even deeper signs? So a withdrawal from sport categorized by a reduced sense of accomplishment, resentment of the sport, and physical, psychological exhaustion. So I've no problem saying it on the call. There's times I've definitely been in this area for myself in terms of resentment of the sport, because I've just been going as a young child when I was playing all these games. So that does happen, and for us as players and for us as coaches, it's important to note that sometimes we just need to give them a break. Sometimes we just need to take the shoulder off the wheel a little bit and allow them to breathe. The signs then, disillusionment and impaired performance. You'll notice that the players will stop coming to training. They'll stop even giving excuses for training. And then there is sleep disturbances that will occur for the athletes. And if we look at the recommendations even further, then like people should learn the fundamental life skills such as coping, stress management, and communication. So again, that's probably a nice little segue into the slide that's due to come in terms of life skills. But I suppose really and truly, and I've said it now 3 or 4 times, the fundamental thing here in terms of recovery for you as a player and you as a coach is getting to know your players and getting to know your teammates and getting to know your coach and having conversations, being open, being honest with them, telling them you're tired, telling your coach you're tired, telling them you have a lot done, and you as the coach accepting that then from the player and moving forward. And then just in terms of our training program, so let's use the example that's probably going to be coming at us after this COVID spell, because all sports now have been in shutdown mode. All sports are potentially going to come back together. All sports are potentially going to clash. So what's going to happen? Pre-season is going to come in. What happens in pre-season? We need to run them. We need to get them fit. We need to do loads and loads of sprints. We need to do loads and loads of repeated bouts of sprints to get our players fit. But what happens when players are playing rugby, players are playing soccer, players are playing tennis, players are playing GA, they're playing all these sports, and all the coaches are thinking the same thing. So I think it's just important to be wary of that from an S&C context. Just being wary of what our players are at and getting to know our players. Okay, so just on the life skills. So again, we're cognizant that a large part of our audience here have joined us, and they mightn't even be involved in the GA, and it's in terms of the nutrition, the interests were there, and the wellness and the life skills. So we felt it was important to put up some ideas on this. So life skills help young athletes who have suffered from injuries or setbacks to cope with stress and demands associated with these traumatic events. So what are we talking about in terms of life skills? Well, we're talking about goal setting, we're talking about decision making, we're talking about communication, we're talking about stress management, and we're talking about time management. So for the players on the call, what are your goals? Like let's park GA for a second. What are your goals in life? Do you want to go to college? Are you in college? What area do you want to go study? What's your career path? It's important to maybe jot those goals down and then have your GA specific goal. Do you want to make the first 15 in your team? Do you want to push to a county squad? And how can you get there? So what's the way forward? What decisions will you make to achieve those goals? And if you get set back and those goals aren't achieved, what's the next step? What decisions are you going to have a positive decision, or are we going to give up? So it's important to have those little areas of communication with yourself and with your athletes, and having open lines of communication. Asking your players, even for example, use the halftime scenario. So instead of coming in as the coach and giving all the feedback, sometimes, and we've all seen it, that our players actually are a fountain of knowledge because they're actually involved and they're immersed in the game. They know what's going on, and sometimes they can provide good feedback that you as a coach who's trying to watch everything might miss. So it's important to have those open lines of communication. How can you reduce stress? So again, getting a good night's sleep, getting good nutrition, and getting good hydration is definitely going to reduce stress. And also just staying on top of things. So staying on top of the previous goal setting, decision making, communications that we spoke about. And time management then is hugely important. Are your athletes coming to training on time? Are you, as the athlete, coming to training on time? Are you getting there early? If that's not the case, how can we change it? How can we make the balance of school? How can we make the balance of life? And how can we make the balance of our sport and commitment all encompassed into one? And what can we do to affect those things? So again, what I'm doing is I'm putting these slides up here for you to have a think about them. It's not my position, or it's not my place to tell you what your goals should be or how you should reduce stress. It's just my idea here is just to get you thinking about it, having a good think about it and see how you can improve these things. So if we move on then to, I said we were going to speak about, we'll say self-help systems, and we move on to what I'm talking about here is monitoring your wellness and tracking your training load. So again, there's 2 areas we're talking about here. We're talking about the coach with his athletes or her athletes, and we're talking about the player themselves looking after themselves. So simple things that we can monitor here. We can monitor our muscle soreness, or we can track it. We can track our fatigue. We can track our appetite. We can track our sleep, and we can track our hydration. And we can do this with pen and paper, simply just jotting down a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being really good, 1 being really, really, really poor. And where are we in terms of our hydration? Where are we in terms of our sleep? And it's nearly a little training diary for us. And we can have that as the athlete. We can also have that as the coach. We can ask our players after training, okay, how did you find that session? Or how was your sleep last night? And yes, it is probably an extra bit of work. And yes, it's hard to get going in clubs, but small steps and just drip feeding this kind of stuff into your athletes and into your training process can help. And then if we are that little bit more interested in it, I felt it was important, and so did Connor, that we do make you aware that there is a simple system we can use. We can, for those of us who are savvy on tech, we can just go and set up a Google Docs form with a questionnaire on it. We can download that to our phone, our smartphones, bookmark it onto our desktop on our phone, click the link daily, and just answer the questions, and that'll revert back to an Excel sheet. Now that sounds very difficult, but what I would say to you is, if there is anyone on the call who might be interested in that system, we can absolutely take you through that, no problem whatsoever. And it's something that could potentially be beneficial for you. And then a big one that's probably often overlooked is heart rate. And I suppose at this point it's very important to make note that as Connor spoke about what low-hanging fruit isn't, I'm probably going to delve into it here as well. Now, there's a huge variance within smartwatches that we can get these days, and I'm not saying all are bad, but I'm not saying all are good either. There's a huge variability in heart rates, and sometimes we need to take that with a pinch of salt. So all these watches and all these companies will publish papers that will say that they are reliable and they are valid, but potentially sometimes they can be spewed results because they're, whatever it is, they can be spewed to suit their needs. So what I would say to you here, first and foremost, if heart rate monitoring is something you'd like to go about checking into, buy a heart rate monitor. That's what I would say to you. They're not that expensive. They're probably actually cheaper than a smart watch, and they'll give you better data. So again, we're here to provide knowledge and to provide you guidance on that. If you do like to and want to go down that area, please do get in contact. Again, what I would say then is, if we have, like I have a Fitbit myself, if we have Fitbit watches or Apple watches, that's fine too, because the most important thing with those is that we constantly track them. So it'll be reliable. It'll be reliable because you're constantly tracking it yourself, and it's reliable to you, but it just won't be that valid. So that's the important point to note. And the heart rate and the heart rate variability then. So look, if we just track heart rate, that's great. We'll get an idea that we have a low heart rate, a high heart rate, a perfect heart rate, and we'll be able to compare it to the norms. The heart rate variability then is a little bit more in depth, and effectively what heart rate variability is, it's the beat in between, or the time taken in between your heart rate. So that could be 1 second, it could be 3 seconds, and the more cognizant you are of that, and again, that's probably a step deeper than the heart rate, but it has been shown in lots and lots of research to be way more sufficient than just measuring heart rate. And then you've got your changes in your nervous system due to overtraining. So what does that mean? So for effectively, if you're overtrained, sometimes your heart rate might even go down. Your heart rate variability may go down. And sometimes that your app on your phone could tell you you're actually getting fitter. But potentially your body is just slowly but surely just getting a little bit tireder, and slowly but surely just shutting down a little bit more. So it is important to take these apps and take the results from these apps with a grain of salt. That's what I would say. And then the increased resting heart rate. So if it increases by plus 10 beats to your average, that's been correlated with high fatigue states as well. So if it goes 10 beats below or 10 beats above, that's kind of what we're looking to jump out at. And then finally, and this is a system I definitely be promoting to every coach and even every player on the line, is monitoring your training load, or tracking your training load. There's a stigma around monitoring because everyone thinks it's someone keeping an eye on you and tracking you and constantly checking what you're doing. But what I would say monitoring for me would mean that I'm just looking after myself and I'm looking after my athletes, and I'm following best practice protocol. And it's very simple. So if we refer to this scale that I spoke about there in a few slides ago, we've got 1, which is, this is in terms of training. So 1 is nothing. 1 is basically I stood on the pitch for the 60 minutes. I didn't run. 6 was difficult. I took part in all the drills. I pushed myself hard in training. I'm tired after training now. So that was difficult. And 10 is I actually can't move. I'm absolutely exhausted. I potentially need to go to the hospital. I'm that tired. So it's important, especially when we are using a scale like this, that we use the same scale all the time. And if we are delivering this to players, that we send them this scale or a scale that we use consistently, because there is a huge amount of different scales out there. Okay. So getting to how we do it then. So it's the session rating of perceived exertion. That's what RPE means, rating of perceived exertion method. And effectively, training load is the rating of perceived exertion multiplied by the session duration. So for example, if I trained for 100 minutes and I rated that somewhat difficult, that's 5 multiplied by 100. That's 500 training units for me in that session. And the research tells us that anything over 2 to 2,500 training units per week is something that we need to be wary of, and it's probably right at that cutting point that we need to either take a little step back or have a look at what we're doing if we're hitting that consistently. Okay, and again, pen and paper, guys. We can track this as an athlete. We can track this as a coach. We can go fancy with Excel if we want, and again, I do have sheets that we can deliver to you if that's something that you think you might use with your coaches. By all means, reach out. But again, I'd be promoting this to start off. If this is new to you, start off with pen and paper. Potentially pick 5 athletes on your team. Ask them after every single training session, how did you find that? Show them the scale, and all of a sudden, you as a coach, you're getting an idea of how hard your players are finding that training session, and you're also getting an idea of your own rating of that session. So let's say I put a session together and I'm saying, okay, I want this to be very hard tonight, and I'm rating that as an 8 before I go into the session as the coach. And the feedback I'm getting from my players is that was a 5. Well, then I know that there's something there that I'm not doing, to get that session to an 8, or there's something there I'm not doing to get that session to a 5. So it's good feedback tool for you as a coach as well. We can go a little bit deeper then. So I spoke about the total training units, 2 to 2,500. And again, we can go a little bit deeper than that. And it's probably for another webinar or another night, because I'm conscious of time. But the monotony then and the strain. So basically, monotony is your weekly mean training load. So your 2,500 units, okay? Your strain then is your weekly training load multiplied by your monotony, okay? And then we're looking to avoid 10% increases on a weekly basis. And that's effectively probably a really, really simple system. Again, reverting back to pen and paper, hand notation. Once we get a little bit more comfortable with it, guys, then we can move towards an online platform or an Excel platform. And yeah, I think, that's from my end, guys, and from Connor's end. Again, I want to say thanks to Connor for the huge amount of work he put into this. And thanks to all you guys from my end for attending tonight. I know Mike is going to finish off there with a couple of slides, but what I'd say to you is we threw a huge amount of content at you tonight. We're very, very aware of that, and it's probably moving away a little bit from the technical and tactical aspects of the webinars we would have covered the last lockdown. But again, Mike is going to be going through the plan for the next webinar coming, and we'll be reverting back to that side of the house. So for myself and Connor, thanks very much for attending tonight, guys.
Thanks very much, Jason. You might just press on to the next slide, so please. Okay, so just briefly, folks, as Jason did mention, next week Mike Quirk will host a games-based approach to Gaelic football, and that will be followed up in March with a hurling version also for those of you that are on there from the hurling side of things. So next week Mike Quirk, and then in March the hurling equivalent will take place. And the lads will be back again then at the end of the month. Connor and Jason will be back on at the end of the month, and they'll provide details on the planning and prioritization around athletic development. Now, that was part of the season planning webinar we would have done just prior to Christmas. and this is just development now of that. Okay, so Conor touched it on that night for those of you that were involved and on the call. So that's a development of that piece from that particular webinar. Folks, I would really like to thank Conor and Jason. Jason hinted on there and touched on it, I suppose, that Conor led this project, and I think you've done an excellent job in leading it and getting it going tonight. So from the preparation and the planning, I suppose, it started before Christmas, ultimately, leading up to tonight. I want to thank the lads for their professionalism and for the work they produced for us. Okay. I would like to thank everybody on the call. So for the first time ever, with the webinars that have gone live from Laois Coaching and Games, we got over 100 people on the call. So I think we had about 106, 107 people on the call there at one stage, which remained consistent there for the night. So I'd like to thank everybody for that and your response. That's hugely important, I suppose, for us, that the people are tuning in to listen to what we have to say. And I think the lads certainly produced for us tonight. Okay. Even those of you that have maybe children or teenagers at home, you might be able to take it there that Jason Coffey said that if you want to develop as a hurler or a footballer, that you should go to bed maybe for 20 minutes or half an hour during the day. Perhaps as a parent there, you could be a little bit economical with the truth on that and stretch it out to maybe 2 or 3 hours over the course of the day, maybe for the next month or so. It might allow for some peace or quiet, and if they did consider, I suppose, that they were going to be a better player out of it, you'd never know. You might get that bit of time to chill out. So that's it, folks. Okay, we will hold the line here for the next couple of minutes. If anybody would like to come in and pose any questions, pass any comments, or just even a little reflection on what you heard tonight, please do so. So once again, folks, I would really like to thank everybody for tuning in. The details will be released on what's coming up next, and I hope you all can join us then again. So if there is any questions, please, folks, open your mic, type it into the comment box, and the lads can answer them here now for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, lads. Good stuff.
Thank you.